Some of them wanted to be caught. One carved the same symbol at every scene. Investigators recognized the pattern immediately. That was the point. Another mailed a piece of a victim's clothing directly to police, postmarked from a different state. A third left handwritten notes signed with a name that belonged to no one. No record, no match, nothing. Investigators reportedly believed these were deliberate provocations, not mistakes. Each one was calculated. Each one said, "I was here, find me." They left trails, real ones, and somehow every single trail went cold. So here's what keeps investigators up at night. Were they brilliant, or were we just not looking in the right place? May 5th, 1993. West Memphis, Arkansas. A small, working-class town just across the Mississippi River from Memphis, Tennessee. 3 8-year-old boys, Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers, didn't come home after riding their bikes that evening. Search parties went out. Police were called. And the next morning, May the 6th, a police officer found what everyone feared in a drainage ditch near a wooded area locals called Robin Hood Hills. 3 boys were found in the water, bound and unclothed, showing signs of severe trauma. The town didn't just grieve, it ignited. This was 1993, the tail end of what historians now call the Satanic Panic, a decade-long wave of fear across America that convinced entire communities that devil-worshipping cults were targeting children. Parents were terrified. Law enforcement felt pressure from every direction. Someone had to pay for what happened to those 3 little boys. The problem was, the police had almost nothing to go on. And that desperation, that need to close a wound before it infected the whole town, is what set everything that followed in motion. But the investigators did have one lead, and it had nothing to do with evidence. Damien Echols was 18 years old. He wore black. He listened to heavy metal music. He had read books about Wicca. In 1993, West Memphis, Arkansas, that made him a suspect. Jason Baldwin was 16, Damien's closest friend. Jessie Misskelley Jr. was 17, a young man with a reported IQ of around 72, according to court records. None of them had a criminal history connected to violence. None of them had a known connection to the victims. But within weeks, police brought Jessie Misskelley in for questioning. The interrogation lasted approximately 12 hours. Jessie was not represented by an attorney for most of it. According to court records, only about 45 minutes of that session was recorded. What came out was a confession, but the details were wrong, repeatedly wrong. Jessie initially said the murders happened in the morning. The boys were killed in the evening. He corrected himself. He said the boys were tied with rope. They were tied with their own shoelaces. He got the day of the week wrong. Investigators prompted corrections throughout. Legal experts and defense attorneys would later argue that the confession showed every hallmark of a coerced, false confession, particularly from a vulnerable teenager under extreme psychological pressure. But in 1993, West Memphis, it was enough. All 3 were arrested, and the town exhaled. Too soon. Because what happened in that courtroom was going to follow these 3 young men for the next 18 years. The trials of the West Memphis Three were, according to legal scholars and journalists who covered them, unlike almost anything seen in modern American jurisprudence. Prosecutors presented the murders as a satanic ritual killing. They brought in an expert witness to testify about occult practices. They introduced Damien Echols' taste in music, his interest in non-mainstream religion, his black clothing, as evidence of motive. The prosecution's theory, in plain terms, was, this teenager looked like a devil worshipper. Therefore, he killed these children as a sacrifice. Physical evidence directly connecting any of the 3 to the murders? Essentially none. Jessie Misskelley was tried separately. His disputed confession, which he recanted, was enough. He was convicted and sentenced to life plus 40 years. Jason Baldwin and Damien Echols were tried together. The jury convicted both. Jason received life in prison. Damien Echols was sentenced to death. And this is where the story stops making sense. Because while 3 teenagers sat in Arkansas prisons, while Damien Echols sat on death row, filmmakers were already rolling cameras. And what they captured would eventually crack this case open in front of the entire country. In 1996, HBO released a documentary called Paradise Lost: The Child Murders at Robin Hood Hills. Directors Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky had been given remarkable access to the trials. What the film showed, the lack of evidence, the atmosphere of the proceedings, the behavior of some of the victims' families, created a national conversation that refused to die. Support groups formed, legal advocates got involved, celebrities took notice. A second documentary followed, then a third. The West Memphis Three had become one of the most scrutinized wrongful conviction cases in American history. Then came the science. In 2007, the defense obtained permission for new forensic testing. DNA analysis was performed on biological material recovered from the crime scene. According to the findings presented to the court, none of the DNA matched Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, or Jessie Misskelley, but it matched someone else. A hair consistent with Terry Hobbs, the stepfather of victim Steve Branch, was reportedly found in the ligature used to bind one of the boys, according to forensic reports submitted to the court. Second hair, reportedly consistent with a man connected to Hobbs's social circle, was found near the crime scene. Terry Hobbs has consistently and firmly denied any involvement in the murders. He has never been charged with any crime in connection with this case. But the question those hairs raised has never been officially answered. So ask yourself, whose DNA was at that scene, and why wasn't it followed? By 2011, Damien Echols had spent 18 years on death row. His execution had been stayed repeatedly. The legal machinery had been grinding forward for years, but Arkansas courts had shown no willingness to simply declare a wrongful conviction and let these men walk out. So the state of Arkansas offered a deal, an Alford plea. An Alford plea is one of the strangest legal instruments in the American system. It allows a defendant to maintain their innocence, to say on record, "I did not do this," while simultaneously pleading guilty to the charges. In exchange, they receive a sentence of time served and are released. All 3 men took it. On August 19, 2011, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley walked out of prison. Free men, guilty on paper, innocent by their own account. Jason Baldwin reportedly did not want to take the deal. He wanted to keep fighting for a full exoneration. According to multiple reports, he ultimately agreed because it was the only way to save Damien Echols' life before the state carried out the execution. Think about that for a moment. A man may have accepted a guilty plea he didn't believe in to save his friend's life. After both of them spent nearly 2 decades in prison for something they say they didn't do. The state of Arkansas got to close its file, but the actual question, who killed Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers on May 5, 1993, was never answered in a court of law. So let's go back to where we started. 3 teenagers, 0 physical evidence, 50 combined years in prison, DNA at the scene that didn't belong to them. Here's what we know for certain. The West Memphis Three were convicted largely on the basis of a disputed confession, questionable expert testimony about the occult, and the social panic of a frightened community. Here's what we know about the science. DNA testing, according to defense forensic reports, did not place any of the 3 men at the crime scene. Here's what we don't know. Who those hairs at the scene belong to, conclusively and legally. Whether the wounds on the victims were caused by a knife, as originally argued, or as some forensic experts later suggested, by animal activity after death, which would undermine the entire Satanic ritual theory, and perhaps most importantly, whether the real killer or killers have ever been identified. The West Memphis Three case forced America to confront the machinery of moral panic. What happens when a community's fear becomes more powerful than its evidence? 3 little boys were murdered, and their families have never received true justice. 3 teenagers had their youth erased by a system that chose certainty over truth. And somewhere in the records of this case, in the forensic reports, in the unrecorded hours of interrogation tape, in the questions that Arkansas courts refuse to fully answer, the truth may still be waiting. The cold archive never closes a file. What do you think happened? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe, because the next file is already open.